Hey guys, it's Jacob here with Promised Land Stories. And the other day, Hermana and I were driving down the West Bank and we saw this large open area. And at first, I thought it was just someone's backyard or an empty field. But it turns out it was actually an ancient threshing floor. Now, I don't know what that was, so I actually looked it up. So it turns out a threshing floor is actually a place where people used to bring their wheat or their harvest. And then they would use that area to separate the grain from the chaff. So if you look over there, you can see a large harvest there at the back of wheat or perhaps barley. Now you can see there in the distance, they've collected them into sheaves, which they were going to bring over here on a cart. Then they're going to place all of that onto the threshing floor itself, which has a foundation of bedrock. Then they would use a threshing sledge pulled by animals, and they would pull it over the wheat in circles. Then they would take a large fork, which was called a winnowing fork, and they would throw the grain up into the air, and that would make the chaff separate from the grain, and the chaff would be blown away by the wind. Then they would be left with only grain. Does that make sense? This is actually where one of the most beautiful love stories played out. Right here in Bethlehem on a threshing floor.
Hi. This is neither wheat nor barley, but Jacob and I were just looking for a place that resembles a field of grain. So I'm reading from Ruth 1 verse 1 and 2. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and the names of their 2 sons were Machlon and Kilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there.
Let's just look at the setting of this text. Bethlehem is on the mountains of Israel in Judea. So there's Bethlehem. I'm not saying that this is the way to go, but it seems to be the shortest and the most logical route. So if you come from the backside of Bethlehem and you come through the Arugot Wadi, you end up in En Gedi. En Gedi is a beautiful oasis in the Judean wilderness. From there, it's only a short while until you come to the narrowest waist of the Dead Sea. This area is called the Lisan, which means tongue, of the Dead Sea. And just as a matter of interest, we learn in historical geography that it's the most inhospitable place on earth. Absolutely nothing grows there. It's interesting for me to note that the first son, Machlon, means disease. And the second son, Chilion, means destruction. It seems like they spoke over these children a destiny. If you cross at this point, then you can travel along the edge up to the Arnon River Gorge. And once you're up there, you're in the land of Moab.
Now let's continue to read. Ruth 1 verse 3 to 6. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. And after they had lived there about 10 years, both Machlon and Kilion also died. And Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. When she heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of the people by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return to home from there. Naomi's name means pleasant, but her life was hard. Imagine that you have to leave your home country because there's a famine. You go to a strange place. There your husband passes away and you're widowed. Your 2 sons marry strangers, people with a pagan religion. That must be hard for any mother. And then after a few years, they also die, and you are left in this strange country. This was not easy. Verse 7 to 10. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to your dead and to me. May the Lord grant that each one of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud, and they said, "No, we will go back with you to your people." Seems like the relationship that Naomi had with God, even though it was a painful, dysfunctional relationship, had an effect on Ruth. Because when Naomi insists again that they leave, Orpah kisses her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. Ruth was a Gentile. If she was alive today, she could have been a tribal Jordanian Arab, because Moab is in Jordan. Now, I don't think it was easy to be in the company of an Israelite widow who says of herself that she was bitter. In verse 13, it already says that the Lord's hand had gone out against Naomi. And then in verse 21, she says, "I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. And the Lord has afflicted me, the Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." And still, Ruth says these words. She says, "Don't urge me," the word in Hebrew is don't wound me, "to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people are my people, and your God is my God. Where you die, I will die and be buried there. May the Lord deal with me ever so severely, if anything but death separates me from you." The last verse of chapter 1, verse 22 says, "So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning." Like Jacob said, this is the beginning of a beautiful love story. But I'm jumping ahead of myself. There was special provision that was made for poor people in the ancient Israel. They were allowed to go to the fields and glean from the sides of the fields, and to go after the harvesters and to pick up the ears that fell on the ground. So Naomi encouraged Ruth to do that. And as Providence would have it, she ends up on the field of Boaz. Boaz is an upright man, but he is also a family member of Naomi. Boaz shows extraordinary kindness to Ruth. And she asks him, "Why do you favor me like that? I'm a stranger." And then he answers her with these words. "I've been told all about you and what you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. How you left your father and your mother and your homeland and came to live with a people that you didn't know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to find refuge." From this point, things heat up quite quickly. Naomi tells Ruth to dress nicely, to perfume herself, and to meet Boaz in the night at the threshing floor. But I will not disclose what happens to them at that moment. Please will you finish reading this story from chapter 2 verse 13 to the end of chapter 4 in your own Bibles. Jacob,
Yes.
how would you like to taste the roasted grain that Boaz prepared for Ruth there at the threshing floor?
Yeah, no, that would be great.
This is for Naomi.
So Ruth brought some of the grain that Boaz roasted for her home for Naomi. And that's why we're going to have a little feast at home tonight. And this is the promised land, isn't it? Morgan, honey. Whoops!
So at the end of Ruth, you come to these few verses. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The woman living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David.
This is good. Do you like it?
It's good. It's chewy, but it's good.
It's very sweet. And Naomi is no longer bitter.
Definitely not after this.